Hey Engagement fans, welcome back to the Engagement Studio. My name is Philip Schmidt. I am joined here today by Megan Meslenka, a member of our Insights team here at Quantum Workplace, and we're here to talk about building a feedback-rich culture. Megan, thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here. Feedback is really important to employees' development and their growth, but ultimately it's a really hard topic to build, or it's a really hard muscle to develop in organizations.
Yeah, why is that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So there's kind of three main reasons that we think about when we think about feedback and why it's so tough. First, it's not natural for humans. We don't want to jeopardize our status of how we think we're performing or the certainty we have around our own beliefs, and so gathering feedback jeopardizes that. Second, most times organizations use feedback as still a very evaluation type of style versus developmental. So if feedback is used for an evaluation, it's still that burden, and it's not comfortable for employees to be around. And then third and foremost, it's selective. So most organizations treat feedback, they kind of keep it exclusive for maybe high-performing employees or leaders. After you reach a certain level, then you can collect feedback. And so it's not natural for employees to practice it each and every day, and that's why naturally it's really tough to kind of build that muscle for organizations.
So how does a company go about starting to create a feedback culture?
Yeah, good question. It starts with defining what it is and what it's not for you and your organization. That's kind of step one, foundational to being able to grow and develop that feedback.
Okay, so what is feedback?
Yeah, feedback is both positive and negative. A lot of times we think about feedback as just being constructive or negative feedback, but we also have to remember that feedback and positive feedback reinforces the behaviors, the skill sets that we're looking to see more of. Next, feedback is supposed to be designed for both performance and development, meaning you're getting feedback on your performance, how you need to evolve your day-to-day goals, what you need to do differently in your job, but also development. It helps you shape your growth differently, and organizations need to make sure that it's both positive and negative and used for performance and development.
Yeah. So logical follow-up is what's not feedback?
Yeah. Feedback is not a chance for managers to get selective feedback from peers to reinforce a rating that they want. I've seen it far too many times where managers or the employee themselves may ask a few people to kind of confirm their own bias that they have, confirm the rating that they want to receive. It's definitely not what feedback is. It's also not a chance for people to throw stones. We always kind of talk about the downfalls of anonymous feedback, and it's really a chance for maybe me to throw stones over the wall blindly at other individuals, just to make sure that I look better. And I will say lastly, it's not selective, meaning it goes back to that point I said earlier. You want all individuals in your organization to be able to request feedback and get the benefit of feedback. We don't always do that.
It's a really great perspective. I can see how important it is to really have those proper expectations met. So we have these expectations. What's next?
After you kind of lay that foundation and you set expectations, ultimately what you need to do is then turn the power over to managers and employees. So by empowering them to be able to request feedback when they want, how they want, it's definitely not letting it be selective anymore, and it's letting the organization kind of adopt these practices over time.
Yep. Yeah, I use our feedback feature all the time to gather feedback on my work, and I find it very empowering to be able to go out and seek feedback and be part of my own personal development. So, but for organizations who are just getting into this, is this something they can just jump right into?
Yeah, I wish it was that easy. It's definitely not. You want to be really intentional about how you design your feedback program. HR needs to spend a lot of time with leadership really building those behaviors, really designing for that outcome that you're looking for with feedback. After you've set expectation, intentionally designing it is key. But you also want to remember that processes and technology play a large part in it. So as humans, we need processes because we don't naturally have good behaviors. If you think about that kind of common saying that processes are in place to drive the behaviors we're looking for. That's what your software needs to provide, is some flexibility to the process so that you can achieve the behaviors you're looking for. And then also the technology that allows you to gently nudge employees when it's appropriate. Let's say I haven't requested feedback in 6 months. I should be gently reminded, like, hey, Megan, you haven't requested any feedback. Here's the benefits of feedback, without having it be an HR kind of mandate. So we want to make the right thing to do, the easy thing to do when it comes to building that feedback muscle.
And what is that easy? What does that look like?
Yeah. So the easiest thing to do or to start with is to start with recognition. That allows people to give positive feedback to each other, to build that muscle, to start to demonstrate how they want to storytell and why things are important to them. And it also gives visibility to really great work. So that's the easiest place to start.
Yeah, Megan, I love our recognition feature. I think it's really important to remember that feedback can be positive, and recognition is one way to do that. But what's next? What's the next point in rolling out feedback?
Yep. Shortly after you roll out recognition, I always recommend starting with that project feedback. So individuals can collect feedback based off of their own behaviors, efforts, and energy, or off their work they're doing. It's much simpler to start with a template or questions based off the work you're doing. Maybe it's after a 6-week sprint or an agile project. Asking about the work itself is a really good way to start. One, it helps employees build that courage to ask for feedback, but also it encourages others to challenge their peers. It's not natural to want to challenge unless you have a culture of kind of real talk. That's the one area that maybe you're better at challenging. But those two things allow for people to build those muscles, to demonstrate what matters to them before kind of moving into more personal feedback that maybe is a little bit more broad and not as specific.
Yeah. And what about when receiving feedback? Are there muscles we can strengthen there as well?
Yeah, we often think that the hardest form or the hardest part of this equation is giving feedback, but it's probably more difficult to receive that feedback. You have to be the one who actually first does something with it, so it puts all the pressure back on you. There's a couple quick techniques that we always encourage organizations to take advantage of around that feedback. So one, making sure that as an employee, if I'm requesting feedback, I remember the context of the feedback being given. I remember that I'm empowered to ask for feedback, and this helps me grow and develop. So it's a very much so a part of that kind of career growth. Ultimately, though, there are some techniques around taking 24 hours before you respond to feedback, talking through that feedback with your manager, making sure that you're digesting that feedback properly and that everyone is sharing that feedback with some positive intent. And you can have a dialogue back with that person. Hopefully your organization's using attributed feedback where you get the chance to kind of follow up on that feedback.
I noticed you mentioned starting with project feedback. What other type of feedback is there, and why do you recommend starting with project feedback?
Yeah, so first I recommend starting with that project feedback because it's less personal. It's easier to critique the work. Maybe we thought we took too long in that meeting, or I could run meetings more effectively, or maybe I didn't communicate out like I should have. That's very easy techniques for me to work on. But the secondary type of feedback that's also very important is that development feedback. So things like, what do I need to work on overall to be a better developer or a better team member? Those are more personal and are a little bit longer term improvements. A lot of times if I need to work on collaboration or leveraging the right people on my team, it's not overnight that I'm going to fix that, and those are longer term development that you can gain from feedback.
So it sounds like you're talking about behavioral feedback.
Exactly.
What other tips do you have around gathering behavioral feedback?
Yeah, it's the more specific you can be with behavioral feedback, the better. So when you are asking for feedback from your peers or cross-functional team members, try to include some specificity to it. So I specifically wrapped up this project where I want to understand how I developed or how I performed, or we interacted in this meeting last week. So the more specific it is and the more the relevant it is in terms of time, the better that feedback will be. If you open it up too broad, who knows what will come back, and are you ready to deal with all that comes back at one time? So you're probably already working with your manager on some developmental techniques or some things you need to focus on for your growth and development. So the more specific you can be in terms of keeping it pretty time bound or asking something that's pretty specific, that will help with that behavioral feedback, and then over time you can kind of broaden that.
All right, Megan, thank you so much for your time today, and thank you everyone for joining us. I hope you learned a little bit more about making a feedback-rich culture. Now let's go make work better every day.